Hello.
Hi, Bart. It's Gloria Jennings. How are you?
Good. How are you, Gloria?
Super.
Got a couple of people who are wanting to find the link to this. I've got to find out.
I think I'm feeding the nervousness of them and making it harder for them to participate. So I want to get some new skills and stuff. I've been looking at weird things like your smile is crooked, and so I should put my smile this way.
Well, and that's something I noticed when I was online. I have a crooked smile too. When I smile, this side is not as high as that side.
So they say
It's not like I've had a stroke or anything. I just noticed, wow, my muscles are more finely tuned. Of course, maybe because I'm right-handed, that I just tend to use more of the muscles in this space. But it looks a little weird when I'm talking because I'm talking sort of out of the side of my mouth. And so now I'm practicing forcing myself to talk more evenly. And that's something I never knew before I started doing these Zoom calls. So that's something that it's you have to practice this stuff. That is a unique thing about this. So thank you for sharing that, Deb. Who else would like to share? I can't always see everybody. I know we've got 24 people. Actually, I think I can see all
Kelly?
24 here. Yeah, Kelly.
So I joined this webinar because I've just made a commitment to get back into Toastmasters this year. And so anything I can do 2-3 times a week, I'm just trying to dive in and just make time for me, because this is something that I need to do for me. I work remote with global teams all the time over Zoom or WebEx or whatever. So that part is not new to me, but plus I like seeing everybody's face. So anyway,
Great.
Thank you, Bart, for doing this.
Thank you. Yeah. Was it Rosanna?
Rosalba.
Rosalba. Hi.
Rosalba. I am doing this because I want to be better at expressing myself when I am giving a speech. For instance, I do practice my speeches, and I talk to my dog when we do the walks. He doesn't answer back. But when I'm giving my speech with real people, kind of like you, I tend to forget things. I come up with my speech, but I want to be able to grab people's attention, and I want them to think that I'm good. Therefore, I am practicing because I want to get better at this.
Oh, great. Well, Rosalba, one of the challenges that may be getting in your way, that certainly gets in my way, is this up here, what we tell ourselves. Often, most people who hear you speak probably would not be anywhere as critical as you are of yourself. So that's where getting feedback from other people is helpful, because often we are our own worst enemies. And of course, that can also make it difficult when we're beating up on ourselves to be able to think clearly and to come across confidently, because you want to sound and look confident, even more importantly than when it is to feel confident. You will eventually build that feeling inside of confidence, but learning to express confidence, even if you're not feeling it, is going to be key. Because what you're saying is you want your audience to think you're confident. So even if you aren't thinking it yourself, and often, like I said, you're going to be your own worst enemy. Don't believe a lot of what you're telling yourself unless you're saying positive things. So, you want to build yourself up and think positively to present a positive persona. But we'll work on some things like that too. So thank you for sharing that, Rosalba. How about one more person? Anybody else want to share what brought you on that's unique for tonight?
I want to be more articulate.
Okay.
And to talk louder.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, one thing might be your mic, because you're not sounding very loud right now. So you might be able to adjust the sound.
I know I can.
Because I'll want to hear, I want you to turn that volume up higher. We'll let you know if it's too much, but right now you definitely could be much louder.
I'm not sure where it is.
Okay, well, that's better right now. And of course, one thing you could do too is to push your voice out there as well. You can actually be louder just with your voice versus adjusting the volume itself on your computer. So you can actually do that. I do that in a room. I could speak in a room to 500 people just as well as I could speak to 50 people. It might put more pressure on my voice, but I know how to project my voice out there without a microphone even. So, but you might just get a little bit of support on that, on how to adjust that. But even putting your mic a little bit closer, you can probably adjust your mic and putting it closer to your mouth. Some of you have probably heard of the 2-finger rule. The 2-finger rule, that if you're working with a microphone, you hold it about 2 fingers away from your mouth. You're not exactly eating the microphone, but you're almost eating it. You should almost be, although I don't say do this, but you should be able to put your tongue to the microphone almost, and that's where the microphone needs to be. Have you ever heard people talk on the microphone and they're doing this sort of thing here? It's like, no, 2 fingers away is where it needs to be, and then you adjust your volume for where you need it to be. So we'll do a little more of that work, and I've produced a little bit of a PowerPoint program to help us stay focused, and I'll go in and out of the program so we can practice some various things. But I'll go ahead and share my screen so that we can go to the program here. And let's see, here we'll start. Slide 2. Play from, not current slide, we'll put the slides. There we go. So welcome. This is my vocal and visual speech techniques workshop. It's meant to be an actual workshop, so you guys will actually be practicing some of these techniques as well. Feel free to be taking some notes as we go, but I'm recording this as well. So feel free to, I'll be sending this recording out to people so you can have that to refer back to as well. And I've been running or organizing this continuing education program, and this year just mostly pushing it since we have somebody else who's running the program, and pushing for more and more educational opportunities, as Ellie had suggested, where we can just learn some different techniques as we go, because that's one thing that Toastmasters traditionally hasn't done much of, which is have classes that teach these. Although you can go almost anywhere online and just do a search for classes on changing your pitch, or classes on vocal variety or body language. And I got a couple of my tips from online. So that's, I steal from the best. And today we're going to be focusing on 3 major things. One is vocal variety in general, as well as body language, which is where we're going to start off with. And this is all about the virtual environment as well, because we aren't in person. Although I'm going to teach you some techniques to use in person, we're going to focus a little bit more on the online activities as well, how to use this online environment to maximize your impact as a speaker. One of the first things I love teaching people about is Morabian's rule. Albert Morabian came up with, when he was doing some research, of what does it take for listeners to receive a message, and what part of the message is it that they're being impacted by. And when he did this study, he came up with something pretty amazing. The first thing he discovered, that there were 3 areas he was studying. One was the visual. What are people seeing? And the other was the vocal. What are they hearing? As well as, we all know communication is the words you choose to say, the words you write down and choose to say. Well, in this rule, what he discovered was 7% of how people receive a message comes from the verbal, which is the words you create. That's why choosing the right word to convey what you're saying, to say, you know, they squished that bug. Now, you could have said they flattened that bug. You could say they swatted that bug, but squished that bug. How many of you get a visual in your mind when I use that word? So you choose a word that creates an experience for the listener where they easily get the message you're speaking. And of course, that all depends on their language, because if English is a second language for you, the communication may be a little bit different in how it impacts. But in terms of, if we were all just working with one language, 7% comes from comes from the words you choose. 38% comes from how you say those words. So it's the vocals, how you use that voice to say the words. So how you decorate the words, basically. And 55% comes from how you look saying it. So we all think that coming up with just the right words is the most important thing, having a great vocabulary, but actually that's not as important as how you say those words. And if people can see you, it's how you look saying it that makes the biggest difference. That's why thinking about how you dress is very important. Whether you want to choose what kind of clothing colors to wear, what kind of designs to wear. Do you want to, I think sometimes, do I wear a tie? Do I wear a suit? What kind of environment am I going to be in that people are going to expect to see? If I'm sitting in a way that's, not necessarily good posture, does this look attentive or less than attentive? It almost looks like I don't care. It's almost like that Marlon Brando approach to speaking. I'm just going to look like I don't really care, even though I want you to care. So you need to look like you care. So posture is important. The look is important. What you choose to wear, like I think very carefully, do I want to wear headphones like Betty, or do I want to wear something that's light where I might even look a little more natural, even though you can see these lines? I might even do a Bluetooth microphone, although that can have its own limitations as well. But the more natural you can look, the better. That's why your background is important. You don't want something that's going to be distracting. Sometimes people have backgrounds that are moving, or if you have people moving in the background, that can be really distracting from what you're saying. Just like in one of our clubs, we used to meet in a restaurant, and you would have the waiters and waitresses going by while you were speaking, and that could be very distracting while you're speaking. And so we want to make sure we can at least eliminate as much of these distractions as possible, because the visual is the biggest impact. Now, when you're not able to see me, now all that's left is the other two, the verbal and the vocal. That's why if you listen to, it's a great thing to do is listen to radio. Listen to when people advertise or speak on the radio, it's all about the vocal variety. They've got to sound very interesting. Their voices are going up and down with their inflection, and sounding excited at one moment and maybe a little more plain at another, and pausing at certain places and stretching words out and doing different things with their voice to keep it more interesting, because that's still more important than the words themselves. It's how you're saying the words. It now becomes 86% of how people take your message. So the words are now double, so they're 14%, but now 86% is verbal, so as the vocal as well as the verbal. And that's how you say it. That's why when you're on the phone, you have to be very careful not to be emotional when you're on the phone, because that will convey 86% of your message. So if you're upset, will people hear it on your phone in your voice? They can hear that. So we've got to think about keeping your voice under control so you can master this. And we're going to work on some of those techniques as we go. And online, like I said, there's a lot more limitations. You got this little window you're working with, so you don't want to do anything that's too far outside the window. And to give yourself more room, you might come further back, but the further back you may be, you could lose the vocals or you could lose the visuals. And those are so important as well. So you have to think about how far back will you stand before you might lose your audience. So I wanted to play for you, and some of you may have seen this before, and I would like you to take some note of what Mike Carr, a good friend of mine he was the first president of, he was the president of Austin Toastmasters, which was my first club I joined 12 years ago. So I knew Mike from that period, and I've seen him throughout the years compete many times. But this last year, he won for international speech. Now, he didn't think he was going to win. He said, I knew somebody else was going to win. So when it came to giving my final speech, I decided I was just going to play with it. I was going to just take some big risks and do some things I have never seen Toastmasters do before in a speech, especially online, almost breaking all the rules. And yet he won. So let's look at this. I want to show you a little bit about what he did here. And see, let me know if you guys can hear this. Hopefully you can.
Welcome everybody to 55's continuing education program.
I don't hear it.
Can you hear that?
No, we can't.
No, you can't. Okay. This isn't going to work then. All right. Well, that's okay. One thing I would like you to do, though, is to go online and listen to Mike Carr's final speech. You will see him do crazy things, such as when he starts his speech as his little head down in the corner. And all you see is just part of his head. And then he climbs out of it, and he's playing with this whole idea of the window coming into the camera, out of the camera, all sorts of really unique movements that I would say I've never seen someone. He actually does this to the camera. It's like, you can't do that in a speech, but he did it. And so what I want you to get from that is you can play with this. And that's what Gloria and I were talking about at the beginning was try to step out of your box and try some things that you haven't done before. And so I'll go ahead and put the link in here for his video, but you can look it up. It's Mike Carr, C-A-R-R. And when you look up Mike Carr International Speech, it should be the first thing that comes up, and you'll see his speech. he gave 2 speeches, and the final one was this one that I'm referring to, although they're both amazing speeches. And you'll see why he won, but also all the unique things that he did, which I'll bring up in just a bit. Yeah, question or comment?
Bart, I think you can share it, but there's going to be something that it says to use the computer audio instead of your microphone.
Okay, well, I can.
So it should come, I guess when you try to share is when it come up, I think.
Well, it didn't give me that option, and that's why I had just assumed I could hear it, but you guys couldn't hear it, and that would be the problem.
Yeah,
So-
we have some issues every time we do presentations in Zoom. It's kind of tricky.
And I hadn't tried playing the video on here. I'd play it for me, and it's like, it works just fine. Obviously, if you guys can't hear it, it's not worth doing, but that's okay.
When you share screen, there are 2 boxes on the lower left corner. If you click both of the boxes, the effect will be much better.
So if I share the screen, and this would be his speaking.
2 boxes on the lower left corner.
Yes, I see. Share the
click
sound
both
as
of
well.
them.
Okay. And let me see here if I can get to this then. Okay, so I'm going to share and then come back to that. So here we go. Can you all hear that?
Mm,
No.
no.
No. Oh, and I did share the box. Okay, okay. So
There's something in setup where you put that they can share, that they can hear what you're sharing. It's something when you set up the to turn it on the more, I think.
Well, I'll try it one more time, but if it doesn't work, we're not going to mess with it. So, because I don't want to annoy you guys too much. So let's see.
End up playing a Bluetooth speaker and trying to sync it up like I've got a bad TV show that I'm trying to make this voice and the sound go together in the picture.
The share computer sound, optimize screen. Let's say okay, we'll try it one more time, but this is just what I did. It should share the computer sound. Oh, I know. 1, 2. I have to put my code in here now. Tell me if you can, oops. Now, let's see, new share. Where is he? Okay, now this should work. Tell me if this works. You hear that?
Yeah, it does.
Excellent.
Mike Carr, the librarian, and Mrs. Montgomery. The librarian and Mrs. Montgomery, Mike Carr.
I was spellbound as I watched the sheriff who had just been shot slide back open that heavy metal door, stagger forward a couple of steps, look deep into the camera and say, I before E except after C. Contest chair, fellow Toastmasters, I was in the 6th grade in Mrs. Montgomery's class watching an educational video where a sheriff was teaching us about writing while a bad guy named Bad English was shooting at him. It was on a film projector because we were technology challenged in my school. And as I watched that film, all of a sudden something started looking strange. The film slowed down, and when it picked back up, it made a sound like, and it looked like it was blinking. Then the sheriff was talking to us from the side of the screen. The blinking started again with a loud noise. Ooh, everything went blank. I ran to the front and I turned off the projector. I opened it up. Something smelled like it was burning. Mrs. Montgomery, I said, can I try to fix this? After school, she said. An hour after the final bell rang, I had disassembled the entire projector all over the floor. I was beginning to put it back together when the librarian came strolling through. What are you doing? She almost screamed at me. Who told you you could do this? I did, said Mrs. Montgomery. The librarian, though, zeroed in on me. This is school property, and it better work when you get it all back together again. If it doesn't work, your parents are going to have to pay for that. Now, my parents did not have a lot of money. If I went home and told them they had to replace a projector at school, I would have been better off in the hands of that bad guy, Bad English. And so, with focused energy, I started putting the projector back together. After 2 hours, it was whole. And Mrs. Montgomery said, let's try it. I reached up and I flipped the on switch, and there, out in front of us, projected onto the screen in all of its glory, was nothing. Nothing. The projector was dead. Mrs. Montgomery put her arm around me and she said, it's okay that you took the risk to try to fix it. The victory is not in the result. The victory is in the try. But I still had to tell my parents. When I got home, I snuck in and I thought, if I just hide in my closet, they'll forget I exist. But then I heard from the kitchen, Mike, come in. I walked in and I said, Mom and Dad, there's something I have to tell you. I love you, and I am scared of sheriffs. I don't know. I ran to my room. I choked. I couldn't think of anything to say. I thought, I'll tell them tomorrow. I crawled on my bed and I looked up at the ceiling and I thought, how do I get to Norway? Now, I know there are people from Norway in the audience, and can I just tell you, I don't know why Norway was my only safe haven on this planet at that point. Maybe I thought that Norway had made a deal with the UN, that they would not let crazy librarians come into their country, but at that night, I drifted off to a very restless sleep, dreaming of swimming to Norway. I was awakened with a jolt when my alarm went off the next morning. As I got ready for the day, I was sick to my stomach. When I got to school, I knew my time was up. I slunk to the library to find Mrs. Landon sitting there reading her newspaper. She was drinking out of this coffee mug. That's concerning. I approached her and I told her the final fate of her projector. She slowly started looking up at me. Her lips started curling. Then she leaned forward and said, fine. What just happened? I'm still alive. I could not believe it. My failure had not killed me. And yours will not kill you. What was it that Mrs. Montgomery said? The victory is not in the result. The victory is in the try. Ever since then, I have walked through life with a little librarian Landon sitting on this shoulder and a Mrs. Montgomery sitting on this shoulder. When I tried and gave my very first speech, which was a train wreck, Mrs. Landon told me, you should never try that again. But Mrs. Montgomery reminded me that the failure had taught me lessons that could be a springboard to future success. And she was right. But her words ring even more true for you. And let me tell you why I know this. For years, Toastmasters has been the place where leaders are made. You are here in some way to increase your leadership skill. And this world desperately needs leaders who will create fertile soil for innovation to grow. Toastmasters is a great example. When COVID hit this year, they could have said, no, we're just going to cancel the contest. We'll cancel the convention and we'll pick it up again next year. But instead, they decided to try something new, this virtual experience. And yes, there have been glitches, but that's what innovation is like. Glitches happen. And the lessons that they have learned take us miles beyond those organizations that just canceled. If you want to lead people to fix persistent problems, someday, somewhere, somebody is going to have to try something new. And you as the leader have the opportunity to encourage that effort that might fail, for a chance to find the future. The victory is in the try. Be a Montgomery leader. Encourage risk. Try new things. The victory is not in the result, my friends. The victory is in the try. Contest chair.
Okay. Let's turn that off. So, what would you guys say is some of the things that you noticed that he did that was unique?
Hey Bart, this is Tatiana. I was watching his speech second time. And one thing what caught my attention is actually the content of the speech itself. All his emotions were appropriate for the content. So if we think in kind of analytically about the content, he brought a lot of interesting kind of issues, even political issues, if you will, if you're listening carefully, what he was trying to convey versus what he was conveying. So all of these emotions and gestures and they were appropriate for the content. And sometimes it's challenging because often than not, when we speak in big audience, we have to convey some very technical topics or very dry topics. So how can you be emotional? How can you be really entertaining when something like that you have to convey? And the idea is that because of his emotions, because of his gestures, he become very influential. So you listening to him and you truly believe, yeah, that's happened. That's a story,
And sometimes it's difficult to make a technical speech that's interesting, but you actually can. There are many ways to do that. And we'll share with you some of the different ways that you can do that. But how many of you heard passion in his voice, the emotion in his voice? And one of the things he's doing that I'm going to teach you about is something that I call the library voice. And the library voice is where you put energy and passion into your voice by pushing more air across these vocal cords. So all you're really doing is you're still using the same voice, but you're pushing more air across the voice at the same time. So it sounds breathier, a little more exciting, a little more, what I would say, passionate. And so if you want to sound more passionate, or if you want to sound nicer, and that's, I love teaching this in customer service, because if you work in the field of customer service, do you have to come across like you care? And are there some times when you just don't care, but you need to come across like you do? So learning how to use that voice to say, if let's say, for instance, the customer is upset and you want to say to the customer, I'm really sorry that happened to you. So if I were to say, I'm really sorry that happened to you, does that sound like I was sorry? No, not at all. So and if I said it more breathy, I'm really sorry that happened to you. Did that sound a little more caring? And all I did was push more air across my vocal cords when I said it. I didn't even change my facial expression. I just changed the sound of the words. And so that's one of the things we're going to work on is the sound. But keep in mind, even more than the sound, it's how you look saying it that makes a big difference as well. So if I were to cross my arms and say, I'm really sorry that happened to you, how many of you might agree that sounds even less convincing? Even if I could sound like I cared, if you opened your eyes and saw me with my arms crossed, you'd say, no, you don't care, because there are certain looks that convey that as well. So the visual is so important, but the vocal is also very important, more than just the words. So you can say, I'm sorry that happened to you, but you've got to sound like you're sorry that happened to them, and you've got to look like you care. So those are all very important pieces that convey that meaning more than the words. So great point, Tatiana. Who else noticed some things that he did? Lots of body language, lots of gestures, a lot of moving around, right? How many of you noticed a lot of moving around? A lot more than I would ever suggest people do. Deborah, you were going to comment?
Yeah, I like the way that he started out with all this wild stuff. And when I was starting to think I was getting a little lost in all this, then he backed up and kind of told the story. And I was able to get into it because I was thinking, I'm not following this. And then he brought me back into it. I really liked that part.
And one thing he did there, Deborah, that you noticed was that he stopped all the movement when he told the story, because it's supposed to be about the story, not the gestures. And you could overdo the gestures and lose the story. And that's why I was very careful to take it down a notch or two. And as I was saying a little earlier, one of the lessons I learned when I was in Australia, I was in Sydney teaching to a group of about 2,000 people. So I'm in this giant room, giant auditorium. I'm on these big screens in the background. And remember what I said about the danger. If you're on these big screens, you can't be too big in your facial gestures and such, because it's going to look 20 feet tall up there. And it's going to be way too much. But so I thought I had the right amount of tone. And when I asked at the break, how it was going, she said, well, I'm really enjoying it, Bart. But one thing I might recommend to you is that you have a bit of a style that I might recommend is a bit rah American, and that doesn't work really well here. And, as she's saying in my terrible Australian accent, it's just not working for that audience. And she said, because it comes across as a bit disingenuous. But you mean like fake? Yeah. It's like, but I'm being passionate. I really care about this, but it was too much. I was too big, too passionate. And I might say in some points in Mike's speech, he might be overdoing it a bit too much, where it could be overboard. And so knowing what's the right amount, and one thing I had to learn how to do was to take my speech down a notch or two and not be quite so gregarious and so excited. And yet I was thinking, in terms of other Australians I knew, I thought they were very outgoing. I mean, I knew the crocodile hunter. Y'all remember Steve Irwin? And he's all about, look at the size of that croc and his teeth. He's like all over the place. And it's like, and they're just looking at me like, no, we're not like that. That's Steve Irwin. We're not like that. And then she said, well, he's from Queensland. And then I realized, oh, she says that like people say, oh, he's from Texas. Like we're all a little embarrassed. He's not like other Americans. He's from Texas. That we're not all like that. And so, but I learned to take it down a notch to be more impactful for my audience. So you do have to know your audience.
I have a
question or comment.
question about can you about pushing your sound through? I don't quite get it. Can you give one more example?
An example of what, Fiona?
You said pushing your sound through. Yeah, that's what you said, right? Pushing more sound through or something like that. What do you mean, and how do we do it?
I missed the words pushing your sign.
Pushing your voice.
Oh, voice. Okay.
Yes.
If I'm like, let's just say, for instance, I'm going to teach you how to sit. So when you're sitting, what you really have to do is you've got to be aware of how you're sitting and where your back is and how you look on screen. Okay, that would be way too much. So take it down a notch and say, well, when you're sitting, I want you to be very aware of how your back is up against the chair, and make sure that it's straight up against the chair, as if you had a board against your back. So that would be a way of taking it down a notch, where I'm not going to be so excited where it's too much, where it's over the top. It's another term that we use here in America, being too over the top. You don't want to do that. And yet Mike often was right at the line of, that's perhaps a little too much for what I might recommend if I were to give feedback on that speech. So, and I wouldn't recommend necessarily doing it quite the way he did it, but what I liked about it was that he did go overboard enough where I would recommend to all of you to, when you practice your speech, before you ever get in front of people, overdo it, exaggerate, because you can always bring it back a notch or two to the right level of energy and the right level of movement. But sometimes you got to take it too far to know what's the right amount to take it down. Patricia.
Yes, I do have a question. So if he's using a computer or some kind of a camera to do this presentation, I'm just curious, because it seems like it's not a computer thing.
Well, I believe he has a microphone, a good microphone, because he's competing internationally. So you want to have the best you can have. And I noticed he wasn't wearing anything, so he couldn't be using the microphone on his computer itself. So he probably has a good microphone that can pick up the sound, almost like people who have podcasts or radio shows have a good microphone. They would never do it use the microphone on the computer. They would probably buy something specific for that And I think Mike did do that and had some unique lighting to make sure he had the right amount of lighting. Although I did notice where he was, had that corner of the room, it wasn't centered, which that then made the light move differently as he moved to different parts of that, that space. And if I were to give him feedback, I might have said that there was just a bit too much space above his head, where if he had brought the down a little bit lower where we could have seen more of his waist, he could have done a little more movements that could have been better seen, and it wouldn't have been a waste of this space up there, where you only need that if he were to be taking his hands up in the air. Otherwise, that was perhaps moving that camera down just a little bit would have been the only thing I would have suggested to him that he could do a little differently. But there were a lot of techniques he used here, and I want to show you guys some of these techniques as we go into this program. So I'll go ahead and share my screen again with this particular PowerPoint program and go through a couple of these. So one of the first things that we're going to focus on is body language. And the most important part of body language is the face, facial expressions, because that's what people see. And your face has 1,000 muscles in it that can create so many different moods and looks. So your facial expressions is so important. And that's one thing that being online is very helpful for if you've got good lighting, because you want to be able to see the face well. That's why lighting is important. You don't want to be too far back, because then it'd be harder to see the face. So knowing what's the right level without being too close. I don't want to be right here, but about, this would be about perfect for that. But you want to show eye contact. And remember, I can't actually look you guys in the eye, and I have to remember your eye is where the camera is. So I have to look up here. That's an important thing to constantly keep my eye focused on up there. So if I move about 2 feet back, I could even look at my notes just below my camera, but not necessarily look like I'm looking at my notes. Like right now, I can actually see my program on here, but I can also look you in the eye at the same time. And it's the eye contact that's so important here. How many of you can tell that I'm actually giving you direct eye contact? And this seems odd to me because I'm looking just to the left of this little green button into this little black space, but that's my camera. So, but we're going to work on some of these different techniques here. So let's just look at some of the body language tips that I'm going to offer here. And the first and perhaps most important is proper breathing. Now, I don't know if you guys are aware, but your lungs have 2 lobes. You've got the upper lobes and you've got your lower lobes. The upper lobes hold 40% of the air. The lower lobes right down here hold 60%. Well, one thing you may notice is if you breathe and you only breathe up here, you only take in 40% of your air. And once you take in air up there, you can't put more air into your lungs. You've blocked off the rest of your lungs. You've maxed out at 40%. But if you breathe in down here first, you breathe down here first and then up here, you can get the 60% full and then the 40% full for the maximum amount of breath. And you need your breath so that not only can you convey the volume you want to convey, but it pushes the power of the words and the vocals out there, plus it calms you down to feed your body with more oxygen. So one of the things I'm going to recommend that you do is think about practicing your breathing. Now, where you want to breathe is where you fill out down here first, where your stomach actually comes out. So it's now that's only 60% of your air. Then there's that other 40%. The full breath is down here first and then up here. So it's that would be 100% of your breath. So you want to think about focusing on breathing well when you're going to be speaking, because the voice and speech is all about the breath. Just like calming yourself is all about measured breathing. So use that slow, measured breathing to pace your speech, to pause, to emphasize, and to add power. But you've got to use the right breath. And a lot of people don't breathe properly. Imagine when you're stressed, where do we tend to breathe more? Upper or lower in our lungs? And it generally tends to be, well, you're going to pass out if you breathe like that because you're not getting as much air as you need. So you have to focus on taking in the air down here first and then the air up here. You could even lay on your back and put a book down here and a book here, and you want to see the two books move at separate movements. So up here and then up here and then down, then down. So it's inhale, inhale. You might even hold it for a few seconds, then let it out up here, and then exhale down here. Hold it for a few seconds. That's a powerful way to relax the body as well. So some people even say breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth, which can be helpful because if you breathe in through the mouth, you tend to dry out the vocal cords much faster, and it can actually mess with your ability to use this instrument well. So people who are great speakers and singers and such learn to breathe in through their nose and out through their mouth. And that gives the air a chance to not only moisturize and warm up as it's coming in and going down to the lungs, but it also doesn't dry the vocal cords out as much. So that's a powerful tip for breathing being a very important aspect. Any question about breathing? Because that's a very important one. So practice and learn to master getting that full breath to be able to use that. Another tip is your posture. We talked about that a little bit earlier, making sure almost like you've got a board, you don't want your back being bent one way or the other, especially leaning forward and such. That's what we do, especially when we're working on our computers so much and we're in our meetings. You want to think about sitting up straight, looking straight as well. So that has a big impact on how you look to your audience. It also looks more confident than when you're leaning forward. So again, sitting up straight and looking into the camera, being relaxed, and you want to face your audience as much as possible. So you're looking here, you don't want to be off to the side, and you don't want to be looking over at things. Like one of the aspects that I see sometimes in these Toastmasters meetings that we have online is that evaluators, when they're reading their evaluation or going through their evaluation notes, they're looking down and then they're coming up to the camera and they're doing a lot of this. And I might suggest, well, why not just write your notes on your computer or put your notes right next to right next to the camera, just sitting up in front of you so you can actually look at them and not have to look down. And of course, just like with when you're standing, you don't want to cross your arms or slouch or do anything that can detract. Some of these techniques are for when you're live in front of an audience, but they can impact it as well when you're in the virtual world with people in meetings as well. Some other important factors about body language is this face and the facial and the eye contact. One thing to practice, and this is something to get good at, is in a meeting, see how much you can smile in a meeting, because often during this meeting, people can still see you throughout the whole meeting. As they can tell, and this is not easy, but I want you to learn to practice even giving your speeches being able to smile more. And that helps to show the teeth. So learning how to smile while you're showing those teeth at the same time can make a big difference. It draws people in, it shows energy, it shows passion. It shows you believe in what you're talking about. Another thing here is to keep your eyes focused on that camera. We talked about that. Be wary of where your camera is and try to, as much as possible, look into the camera when you're talking to people, as if you don't realize they're around here, they're down here, your notes are over here. You're just focusing on that eye contact, just like this. It's a lot easier when you're in a meeting in person to give eye contact, because then you can move around the room and connect with people face to face. And of course, there you don't want to look people in the eye, you look people here about the bridge of the nose. You may recall those times when you are standing so close to somebody, you're not sure which eye to look at, and so your eyes are darting back and forth. It's very distracting. So what you should do is look in a simple way, just kind of generally right here, and give people your full eye contact. It seems weird to you, but as far as your audience is concerned, you're giving them full attention. So those are some aspects to keep in mind about eye contact, especially when you're on these virtual calls. Keep in mind, you got to look at them through the camera. The big thing I want to focus on here is gestures. And there's three primary types of gestures. And we're going to focus on the first one, which is symbolic gestures. And these can be with your head, these can be with your arms, these can be with your hands, your fingers. But symbolic gestures are for like offering directions, numbers, things like this, such as, so they went off to my right over here. Now, of course, when you're online, you got to be careful. Is this your right? Now, I've got my computer set on mirror. So with my computer set to to do visual mirroring. If I do this to my right, you actually should see me pointing to my right because it looks to your right when you're looking at me on screen. Raising hand signals, such as, I told him to stop. You just need to stop, guys. Things like this will, or take it down a notch. When I said take it down a notch, is another way you can do things. Or the thumbs up. Yep, I agree. How's everything going? Things like that. Notice I don't just do it with my thumb. I also do it with a sort of a nod of the head where I'm turning my head and even looking more with the one eye versus looking straight onto the camera. I'm turning my head and doing this. So there's all sorts of little things you can do with your body to signal. And again, with your speech, you have to decide what that right signal is going to be. This is something I saw Mike Carr doing a lot when he was doing his speech, was deciding what signals he wanted to do when he was talking to people about various things, when he wanted to share various different aspects, when he was talking about the teacher on this shoulder versus the teacher on that shoulder. I had this teacher and that teacher. Just don't mix them up when you refer back to them again. Make sure you know which one was which. If I'm talking about numbers, well, the first thing I want to talk about is this, the second thing is this, and the third thing is this. One thing I'm aware of is I'm going to do it to the side of my face, because notice if I do it in front of my face, is it easier or harder to see? See, to me, I see the fingers in front of me, but it's mixing in with the skin color of my face and it might be harder to see. So I might want to do it in the darker area since I'm lighter skinned here and got a darker area. So first thing, so I think very carefully about where on camera I'm going to do that. Whereas if you were live, you wouldn't have to think about it. You can just do it off to the side and it doesn't really matter so much. It does matter when you're online. So it's lighter on this side of my background. So I might want to choose to do it with my left hand, but I'm not left-handed, but I could do it this way, taking my right hand and moving it over here. But I've got to think about how I've got it faced. So first, second, notice if I do second, you can't see it second. So you got to make sure you've got your hand turned. So be aware of where you are on your camera at all times when you're speaking. That's why it's always good to see yourself as well. But these are some things that you can practice by recording yourself and then looking back on it and see what worked, what didn't work. And again, exaggerate a little bit so that you can play with it.
I have a question about
Yes.
the directions. Did you say that you say left or right based on the audience or your own direction?
It should be based on your audience, because keep in mind when they're listening to you and you say you're right, they're going to look at this and go, but he's looking to my left. And then we as an audience have to change that and go, oh, it's his right, my left. You might as well go with, make it easy on your audience. So speak to your audience. So if I'm going to say to your right, look at to your right here. First of all, I'm going to keep in mind that I've got my camera right here. So look to the right. How many of you are saying me go to the right? That's because I've got my camera set on mirroring. If I didn't have it set on mirroring though, it would be the opposite, and then it would be confusing to my audience. And it is all about how your audience interprets your message. So think about how are they receiving your message. That's how you should signal them. That's why I want to also think about the darker background here. If I've got lighter fingers, I want to use that side to indicate the numbers. Was that helpful, Fiona?
Yes, I think it depends on the situation. I think it's I kind of get it. Yeah, just whatever make the most sense for the
And
audience.
there's no definite right or wrong here. There's no rules per se. So it's really about what looks best to your audience. So try it and then record it, play it back and see how does it look for you. You may want to change up what you're doing because it didn't have the impact when you became the audience that you thought it would have. That's where recording is helpful. Mm-hmm.
Because I do yoga, and some yoga teacher, when they're not facing you, they're actually facing the side. One yoga teacher, whenever she do right leg, she always use left, and get it even more confusing. Exactly. I think it only happens if you are facing the camera to do the mirror, and if she's on the side, and then get me so confused which hand is which, so yeah.
And that's an important thing for an instructor to realize is if you want your people to get this sense of what you're saying, make sure you know what it is they're seeing, because it's what they're seeing that matters, not what you're trying to imply. So if I choose the wrong hand, if I'm using my right hand, but I'm facing you, it's going to look like I'm pointing to the left. I'd better say, go to your left, but I'm going to use my right hand when I say that and say, go to your left, you know, but here, of course, I've got my mirroring on, so I can do it the way it looks here. Go to your right, go to your left. It should look proper. It's going to be your right and your left. So great point there, Fiona. And pointing for positions, up, down. It's like somebody was asking before, so where is Ellie? Oh, she's down over here. Now, I don't know if on her camera and on your screen where she is in there, but she's over here on mine. So that's a way you can use these gestures, these symbolic gestures. A second type of gesture are the descriptive gestures, where you communicate an idea or movement, such as spreading your hands apart to show length. So it was about a foot long. You know, this snake was so big; it was about that big around. And again, here, if I do that in front of my face, it doesn't work as well. So I might want to do it over here. And again, think about the angle that you're doing it. So if I were to do it, it was about that big around, that's not going to work well. So I've got to think about where's the camera? It's over here. So I got to play to the camera. So it's about that big around. But how many of you can see exactly how big around that is? Because you can see the white space and then the dark space. So that's a way you can use these to describe things. So you can describe shapes, you know, the square or a circle or all sorts of different shapes. The swaying of hands. So they move from one direction to the other direction. Now, one thing Mike did in his video that I might not recommend for you guys is be careful about coming in too close to the camera. Unless you're purposely wanting to do that, it can be distracting. So try to keep around in the body area. So if I were to go, they move from one area to the other area and then back again. You know, I would rather do it that way than go, they move from one area to another area and then back again. That's harder to communicate. So be aware of what is your audience seeing, which makes this virtual world a completely different way to communicate. You have to have a whole new awareness. Also, it's in the gestures you make, the emotional gestures. They can make a big difference. If somebody is angry, you know, the emotions of the face show those, that the face is probably the most powerful way to show emotions. And that's why I love those little emoticons. With the slightest change in the emoticon, it changes the feeling that they're trying to express. So it doesn't take much. Like I've got the really dark eyebrows, just a little, all the different things I can do with my eyebrows can change. You know, I can raise my eyebrows and then nod my head like that, and that can change everything. I could do this to look confused. Now, does this look confused or does it look angry? And who gets to decide? So if I want to look confused, well, that looks angry. So I want to think, no, confused, I have to move my eyebrows up and go, oh, So you have to practice these emotions and see if it comes across the way you intend. Because who gets to decide if you look angry or if you look hurt or if you look quizzical or frustrated? Your audience gets to decide that. So you want to think about, am I conveying it in the best way possible? So that's why you want to get feedback from people when you're practicing your speech, so that you say, I want to convey my frustration. I'm so frustrated, so you can say it, you can make the sounds, you can look it. I could even do it without my hands, and it's like, does that look frustrated? I might need the hands to play it up even more. So, or clasping the hands can work really well. If you hold your hands like this, but down a little bit lower, so this looks more like I know what I'm talking about. So I could do it that way, or I could do it this way. They call it the church, the steeple. The steeple hold is what they. So this is generally somebody who is like a professional who seems to know what they're talking about. But it could work for you, and it might not work for you. So you've got to practice these things. So decide what you want to convey when you make a sentence. Just like you want to think about how you say it, you want to think about how you're going to look when you say it. What emotion do you want to convey in that moment? And that's one thing you saw a lot in Mike Carr's presentation, was a lot of emotion when he was doing his presentation, whether it was passion, fear, anger, frustration, all these different emotions he's conveying. He was doing both with his body, his face, his voice, all of it to convey what he was saying. So any questions about body language? So it's harder to practice that a little bit on here, but I wanted to try a little bit with you guys. So we're going to do, I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment. So let's say, for instance, yes.
This is Veronica.
Yeah,
So my
Veronica.
question is, you have, and I know, you have all the different gestures and things. How do you make it more natural? Because you practice so much, you don't think it becomes more, I don't know, because you're practicing it so much to get the timing just right, that it then becomes not as natural as it should be, like flowing.
Good point, Veronica, because you want it, if it's going to be natural, it has to look and sound almost spontaneous. Even though nothing in Mike's speech was spontaneous, how much of his looked like he had actually, that he was just being himself. He was just reacting in the moment. But he's actually not done that. He's actually put into his speech at various different points what he's going to do with his body, what he's going to do with his hands, what he's going to do with his face. So just as much as you put in the words, you might want to put in there how you're going to say certain words. Like I have in my speeches, certain places where I'll say, I'm going to stretch this word out, or I'm going to go up pitch here or down pitch here. And just like that, I'll also have gestures, and I'll say, at this point, look frustrated. And I might have, what am I going to do to look frustrated, and come up with what that look is going to be. But you do want it to look fairly natural. You want to make it look like that this is what you would do if you were in that situation. Like if I was frustrated, there's ways I could do it where it would look real, and there's ways I could do it where it wouldn't look real. Such as I was talking earlier about the old silent films and what they would use to convey fear. If I was going to be fearful, here's my look. If I'm worried that my parents are going to get angry at me if I have to tell them that I'm going to have to pay for this projector, it should look like this. Because that's what fear should look like, right? Well, that doesn't look real at all. So it's like, no, fear is like, or nervousness. You have to think about what does that look like and get feedback from people, Veronica. That's why I always say practice your speech with somebody before you ever go in front of the group, because if you want to make sure it comes across natural and real, one of the things you have to be able to do then is have someone say, yeah, that looks more natural there, or that sounds natural to me. If someone says that does not, you want to practice that and change it up. Yes, Gloria.
Well, in real conversation, if you were having a conversation and with someone, wouldn't those emotions and gestures come naturally? I mean, when I give a speech, it's a conversation that I'm having with my audience. And so I move my hands and I get scared and I get excited and I, do all of those things as much as you would if you're talking to a friend.
And that's very, very true. If you can, but have you ever tried doing something like that and then, but they didn't think it worked? They didn't think that you seemed natural? In other words, could you come across as fake when you're not trying to be fake? Has someone ever said to you, well, that doesn't seem you don't sound very sincere. No, I am sincere. That's what sincere feels like to me. Well, if they're saying it didn't come across as sincere, you might take that feedback and say, what could I do to fake that sincerity better? Because essentially you have to learn how to convey that, and it may not come naturally to you. Like a lot of actors, that is what they work on, is how to do something that if you have to pretend like you're in love with this person because you're doing a love scene with them and you actually cannot stand that person and you can't wait for this scene to be over, you can't look fake. It's got to look and sound real. When you saw, what was that movie about, Dirty Dancing. And in Dirty Dancing, the two lead characters did not like each other. And yet they had to play as if they were in love, and it had to be convincing.
Well, it's called acting.
It is called acting.
And they get paid good money for that.
Well, and they work really hard at learning that, but it's a good skill to learn, because sometimes you want to know that communication, Gloria, is not about what you say to people. It's about how they take your message. So if you want to convey sincerity to someone, let me give you an example here. If I wanted to convey to you that I did not steal money and I've been accused of stealing money, well, naturally, I should be very defensive because I have never stolen money before and I did not steal that money. I didn't steal that money. So that looks innocent, doesn't it? No?
Sound
But
like
that,
President Clinton denying.
yeah, exactly.
It depends, Bart. It
I
depends
did not
who is
have.
your audience. Who is
Huh?
your audience?
Well, that's the thing. You have to know your audience well. That is something, and knowing how to communicate well to your audience. And the only people who could tell you if you're effective at reaching your audience is your audience, Tatiana. So one thing you want to do is learn how to say it in a way that works well. So if I were to say, I didn't steal that money, I might not want to be too defensive, because most of us think that if you're too defensive, you might be guilty. But then what if I were to say it this way? I didn't steal that money. That sounds kind of whiny, doesn't it? How about this? Well, I didn't steal that money. Well, you did something with it. Well, I didn't
Didn't steal it, then you sound like you did because your voice went up at the end. I didn't steal that money.
Well, how about if I say it this way, Gloria? I didn't steal that money. So I stretched the word that out and emphasized that word. And then you think, but then you stole something. I now know you're guilty. So we're saying something different every time. And if I wanted you to think I was innocent, maybe I should stretch out the first word and say, I didn't steal that money.
Somebody else did.
But you know who did. Yeah. So
yeah. So I have a challenge though. I kind of, well, the best way to convey your message is being authentic to your audience. But on the other hand, the delivery can be wrong. So where is that balance? So if I'm trying to convey something and I'm not authentic and I'm kind of trying to play, right? So the audience can say, well, she's just, full of BS, right? But depending on the audience, and they may say, no, I mean, she's just really convincing and influential. So what would you recommend? Because this is an important thing in the corporate environment. We may not be able to be that vocal and that, entertaining. We have to keep it all cool, calm, and collected. So with that said, so I personally been facing these challenges throughout my whole life in the United States. So what would you recommend?
I'd say restrained enthusiasm. In other words, you want to maybe keep the emotions under some control, but you've got to show the emotion. So let's just say, Tatiana, you give me a Christmas gift, because you're probably going to send me one, I'm sure. And you give me this gift, and I get this gift, and I go, wow, this is exactly what I was asking for. I thanks. I really appreciate it. Did that seem excited?
No, probably not.
And you're thinking, what? Oh, was that not the best gift? Can I get you? It's like, no, I really liked it. No, I'm just not the kind of person who shows a lot of emotion. Well, that's going to be a problem then, because if I'm conveying I'm not really excited about the gift, but I'm trying to communicate to you that I am excited about the gift, I'm failing in my communication. And learning how to pick up on those very subtle cues of what tells somebody that you're sincerely appreciative, that you're sincerely grateful. One thing that does that is that library voice. So if I wanted to sound innocent about stealing the money, one way to sound innocent is to use that library voice and say something like this, just sort of evenly throughout the whole sentence, and say, and I'll give you eye contact as well, and go, I didn't steal that money. Did that seem innocent? No, Gloria's just like, she doesn't believe anybody. But it was like, I didn't steal that money. So if I were to be breathier, it sounds a little more innocent, a little more naive and nicer. And in that way, it sounds more believable, more trustworthy. And so knowing how to use the voice to do that. Now, that can be manipulative. There are people out there who are con men who will manipulate people through using their voice like that and make you sound like Gloria had mentioned Bill Clinton. He's an expert at sounding like he really cares about you. And I don't know if he really does or not. I would hope he does. But when he says something, he sounds very sincere. He knows how to say that. And it does sometimes come across as manipulative, and people don't like to be manipulated. So you do want it to be honest and real, as Veronica had said, but you also want to make sure you do convey the message. So I have someone in one of my Toastmasters clubs who's an engineer, and he just doesn't do much with his voice. He can be very excited, and he said, yeah, my wife and I just got back from this vacation, and it was the most amazing vacation that I've ever been on in my life. They had the most beautiful beaches. The water was this crystal blue. The beach was crystalline white like glass. It was just amazing. Now I'm starting to add more of the emotion in there. He doesn't add any emotion into it. It just sounds so bland. And yet it doesn't sound like it was the best vacation of his life. He could do higher highs and lower lows. And that's what we're going to get to next, is not just the body language, but how you say it is so important. So how you look saying it is the most important if we can see you, but how you sound is also very important. And that's the next step we're going to get into. So, but good questions, and see if this clears that up a little bit more when we get to this next section here. So we'll move back into this from the current slide. So this is that dynamic delivery, and we're going to focus on 4 things. There are other things we could focus on, but mostly it's the power, the pacing, the passion, and the pitch, which to me is the most important of all. So the first thing is the power, and we talked about that a bit. You've got to be able to hear the voice clearly. You want to be loud enough to be heard by everyone. And yet you don't want to be too loud, because this could be too loud and then people would be reaching for their volumes to lower it down a bit, because that's way too much. So you don't want to be too loud, but you also don't want to be too soft, because sometimes if you're too soft, it's coming across as not assertive, and you don't want to come across as too passive. And of course, you don't necessarily want to whisper, because whisper is where air is just coming across the vocal cords. It's very hard to hear. So I would rather do a soft whisper, which is more of the library voice, because it adds that caring into it. And if you add loudness or power to the library voice, it adds the sound of enthusiasm. So we went on this amazing trip. So again, it adds that enthusiasm. So who would like to try the library voice about, let's say, for instance, tell me about your Thanksgiving and you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Who would like to say, we had a wonderful Thanksgiving? Who would like to try that? So, Tatiana, why don't you give us a try?
Okay,
tell us a wonderful Thanksgiving,
I'll try.
even if it wasn't.
We have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
So what I heard you do is you stressed wonderful, so a lot more power under that word, and that's where you're using that power, and that stresses the word, and that makes a big difference in making us believe that you really did have a wonderful time. Now I want you to try it a little breathier, but still I like that added power, a wonderful Thanksgiving, but now a wonderful Thanksgiving, more breathy.
We had a wonderful Thanksgiving.
How many of you noticed the difference there? And you think, wow, I want to know more about your Thanksgiving. It sounds like it was amazing, because mine was not all that great, but yours I want to hear about. So it draws people into it. Notice how that library voice makes that difference. Gloria, do you want to give that a try?
No. No, she did a wonderful job.
Now I want you to say the same thing to what you just said, but now I want to hear a breathier wonderful. So push more breath out as you say that powerful. She did a wonderful job.
She did a wonderful job.
More, I want to hear wonderful job. The wah sound, okay, where you do it naturally, but I want you to learn how to do it even unnaturally, where it can sound natural.
Well, that's the problem. You're asking me to do it. You know, it has to come from someplace.
Well, actually, it doesn't have to come from you. You want the impact that when you say that line, you're saying it as if you really want people to ask you about it, because it was wonderful.
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 There you go. That's it. See, now, did that sound fake to you?
But if you do it often enough, it's going to. It's the same thing with the hand gestures. They become mechanical.
Yeah.
You know, it's all about, in my world, being natural, being your true self.
And so I want you to stop all of that, because you don't need to be your true self. You want to come across like your true self. That's what you want. Being your true self may not necessarily work if you don't have the ability to play with your voice. Because let's just say you have one of those monotone voices, which you don't. But if someone did, and I said, just be yourself, it's not going to work for some people because their voice, they don't go very high in their voice, and they sometimes don't go very low. We'll do some more with pitch in just a moment. But this is where practicing that library voice, when you want to sound sincere, there is a sound of sincerity in the voice, and that's what I call the library voice.
Wonderful.
Any questions about that? Because I know we're running a little low on time, and I want to catch us, give you guys a chance to get all of this in. So let's
Where
go
do you get the air?
Oh, that again, it's all about that breath. So make sure you get plenty of breath. And some people have called this like Marilyn Monroe was really great at doing this voice, where she created a voice that was very vulnerable. Now, Gloria, if you watch Marilyn Monroe on the screen, you would think, well, that must be how she is. That's just her. No, it's not at all the way she actually was. There was actually a great movie called My Week with Marilyn, and she actually turned to the character, and one of her friends, and she said, "Do you want to see Marilyn?" And they said, "Yeah." And then she turned and became Marilyn Monroe, from this natural person that was, Marilyn Monroe, the person, to Marilyn Monroe, who we believe her to be on screen. And
Right.
she turns
That's
it on.
exactly what you're saying. Marilyn Monroe on screen. So what I'm getting from that is that you want us to be actors when we do our talk.
Only if you're wanting to convey something and it's not working for you. If you're trying to convey sincerity, but it's not coming across as sincere, I will say, step out of your box and change how you're doing it. Yes, that is you, and that's how you normally do it, but you can learn how to do it differently, such as a laugh. Have you ever heard people laugh and it didn't sound like they were really laughing? It's like, that's fake, So, but can you learn how to do it where it really sounds funny, where it really sounds sincere? You can learn how to do that. And there's a sound that you can learn and practice that. And if you learn how to do that, you bring acting into your speech, which makes your speech even better. And so part of it is acting, because at that moment, you may not be feeling that emotion, but you want to convey that emotion at that moment. And that might require some acting if you have to turn that emotion on at that
Do you
moment.
think that my car was acting?
With that,
I don't know him.
Probably not. I would say that was more of a passionate speech where he's trying to motivate people. And so I'm not thinking it's coming across as acting. Though, are there days when you're just not feeling the energy and you just have to put it out there? And sometimes the more you put it out there, the more it comes back to you. I teach people how to the meet and greet exercise, where if you're just not feeling very warm and connecting, and yet you need to come across as warm and connecting, go take a moment and interact with 3 people. And every time you interact with the next person, I want you to be even warmer, more gregarious, more eye contact, smile more, be more connecting, to the point where by the time you're at your 3rd person, you're being totally fake. You're just really being really warm, really outgoing. But the more you do it, because you can always bring it down a notch or 2, but the more you do it, the more it comes back to you, and you suddenly actually feel more that way, and you didn't feel that way earlier. So yes, it is acting, but it also can become real. So as he's doing that speech, I believe it's real, but I don't believe he felt that way 2 minutes before he gave that speech. He wasn't in that
I don't think
mood.
that's his real self either.
Yeah.
And,
But I can do that when I'm talking on there. I get really passionate about what I'm doing. And
that's
so
what I'm saying about acting.
Acting classes are a powerful way to learn about the subtleties of communicating and across the way you want to come across. Not the way that's just you, but what works for them. How do you communicate to them how you feel? Because if you're not able to do that successfully, you'll have to change how you're communicating so that you can be more effective. Now, here's a few things that you can do that can make a difference there. So we'll go back to sharing that screen. Let me go back.
I have a question.
Where's my? Oh,
hello, Tony.
Oh, yes.
So there's a question on the floor, Bart.
Yes, please ask your question.
I guess like I have like the opposite, I guess, problem. So usually I talk because I used to work in customer service. And so the sincerity, the more calmer, more, I guess, more agreeable tone is natural to me. And I'm trying to work on that more confident, but like where it doesn't appeal like I come across as a jerk because for some reason like Mike wasn't very appealing to me for some reason because I felt like he was just trying too hard and it was just kind of like it felt like was really theatrical and I felt like it's more
It
like
was very
play.
theatrical.
Yeah,
I do agree.
and
And
so
I would probably take it back a notch or two and not quite do it to that extent where it's a little overblown. But he was playing. He said, I'm going to try something I haven't tried before. And he was taking a risk. But it worked for his particular audience. They did vote for him as the best speaker in the world. But yes, you can watch that and go, whoa, that's way over the top. I would not do it that way. And I wouldn't give the speech that way.
right.
But let me just show you, Tony, a few things you can do with your voice while we've got this time and see if you can find some answers in this. And then we're going to do some more work on this. But where I think we want to get to is what you're doing with your pitch, learning how to change up your pitch a bit more. But the second thing that we were focusing on was the pacing. This is where you pause more, especially for emphasis, or if you want people to consider what you're saying, put more pauses into your speech than we normally do, and stretch certain words out to have a bigger emphasis on those words. That's one of the things I'd recommend that can have a bigger impact on what you're saying. And then to create more passion, that's about the energy and the emotion that you put out there. That can be not only the eye contact, but how much you're pushing the sound across your voice. So if I could, and this is what I'll recommend for you, Tony, is you might practice getting down to a lower pitch in your voice. So coming lower, but then softening it with that. So saying it with a lower voice, but softer as well. So, because sometimes when they speak, they have a lower voice and they can come across more aggressive than they intend to. So I teach them how to soften that approach by using that library voice, the deep voice, but the library voice across there as well. And that can change the impact of your voice as well. But that pitch is probably the key here, is learning how to go higher into your voice and how to come lower into your voice, and doing this virtual roller coaster ride with your voice. We're going to do some more work on this at another time. So we're going to do some more workshops, but it's now 8:30. So I know there's a lot that we've tried to cover in just this period, and probably maybe too much to cover. I might separate body language and the vocal variety so we can practice more with the voice. But what I want you guys to do over this next week is that when you practice speaking, try to do some exaggerated speaking, higher highs, lower lows, more pauses, and just see what works. And you can always take it down a notch and make it a little more natural for you. But I do want you to try, Gloria, being a little bit outrageous, sort of the way that Mike was in his speech, but then take it down a notch or two to be more normal and more natural for you. But you're still playing with a little more of the changes with your voice while you're doing it.
The reason I'm laughing is because that has appeared on my evaluation, that I am too over the top. So I got to find a happy medium.
And yeah, you want to find out, well, where were you over the top? Because there may be places where you were just right, and there might be places where it was too much. And that's where getting feedback. So I'd want to know, well, where was I over the top? Because it can't be the entire speech. And this is where recording yourself and being able to go back through the speech is such a helpful tool, because then you can see those moments when you can be over the top. Because I certainly can be over the top, and trying to find what's the right impact I want to have can sometimes be difficult to find that balance. But you do want to have enough energy where it is up there, where it's not coming across as you know, if you're trying to be high energy and it's just not getting there with the energy level. You've got to take that energy up, but you've also got to know when it's too much and bring it down to the right level. And that's what I'd recommend. So it does take practice though, and that's where recording yourself is going to be the key here. Listen for that vocal variety, look for the body language on here, and the little things that you can do to adjust this to take your speech to that next level. So I hope you guys had a lot of fun. It was a pleasure working with y'all, and I will make this recording available for you guys, and we'll do this again. So thank you all for your time.